This is a brief, special episode. There will be an additional November episode in regular format shortly.
The film which you are about to see is an account of the tragedy which befell a group of 5 youths. In particular, Sally Hardesty and her invalid brother, Franklin. The events of that day were to lead to the discovery of one of the most bizarre crimes in the annals of American history. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
That's how it begins, and it's not true, of course. But it was harder to instantly look things up in 1974, so people weren't sure. And it made the whole thing much more unsettling. A year later, Peter Weir's Picnic at Hanging Rock, a film sometimes described as Australian Gothic, did the same, opening with a silent slate declaring,
"On Saturday, 14th February 1900, a party of schoolgirls from Appleyard College picnicked at Hanging Rock near Mount Macedon in the state of Victoria. During the afternoon, several members of the party disappeared without a trace."
Also untrue and unsettling. 4 years later, in 1979, Italian Ruggero Deodato had begun work on Cannibal Holocaust. It's an unpleasant little production about a documentary crew presumably murdered by natives of the Amazonian rainforest, but does nonetheless bear the distinction of being the first found footage horror film released. However, it was another imaginary documentary crew lost in the woods near Burkittsville, Maryland this time, that really got the ball rolling in 1999. After the Blair Witch Project and its clever viral marketing campaign further pushing the fiction to fact envelope, a flood of found footage films rushed in. You probably have your favorites, and I'll name a couple of mine. Creep from 2014, Creep 2, and the series, The Creep Tapes. Also, BBC's 1992 production, Ghost Watch, less successfully imitated in 2023 by Late Night with the Devil. Both of these being set at Halloween, the significance of which will soon become apparent. The interesting thing about the found footage phenomenon is how intrinsically it's tied to the horror genre. The supposed film and video records that form the basis of 20th and 21st century horror movies can be compared to the use of fictional written records incorporated into important early works of Gothic fiction. The very first of these, the first Gothic novel, Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto, written in 1764, claims to be a translation of a recently discovered 16th century Italian manuscript, telling a story dating back to the Crusades, and of course no such manuscript existed. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, first published in 1818, and without her name, significantly, is framed as a series of letters between Robert Walton and his sister Margaret. And within these are further nested narratives supposedly related by Victor Frankenstein and the creature. Stoker's Dracula is also a sort of fictional scrapbook of personal letters, diary entries, and newspaper clippings. Because horror stories contain fantastic and supernatural elements that strain credulity, these purported sources function as a sort of evidence of their veracity, meaning the stories are no longer created but merely uncovered, suggesting at least that the author had no hand in their creation. Gothic tales by American 19th century writers also employed the technique. Nathaniel Hawthorne presented his novels The Scarlet Letter and The House of the Seven Gables as taken from old manuscripts, and Edgar Allan Poe was crazy for the technique and related dissimulations. From our Hollow Earth episode, you may remember Poe's novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, which he claimed was taken from a non-existent 1836 newspaper account of a shipwreck. And those who subscribe to our bonus episodes have heard Poe's Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar, story of a dying man placed by a mesmerist in a state of suspended animation. While no fictitious source material was employed here, Poe's clinical style of presentation led many readers to presume the story was true, and it was quoted as a matter of scientific study in the 1847 book, Early Magnetism in its Higher Relation to Humanity. Poe also indulged his imagination spinning yarns about alchemical experiments and fantastic travels in articles like von Kempelen's Discovery, the Journal of Julius Rodman, Unparalleled Adventures of Hans Pfaall, and a New York Sun article about a transatlantic balloon crossing, now anthologized under the title The Great Balloon Hoax. The tendency to bolster fantastic accounts via imaginary documents and diaries and letters is well represented into the 20th century by Lovecraft. The Whisperer in Darkness, The Statement of Randolph Carter, The Shadow over Innsmouth, and The Call of Cthulhu all make use of the technique. And doggedly repeating references to the Necronomicon throughout the body of his work led some to believe it was an actual book. Other authors, like August Derleth and Clark Ashton Smith, referencing it in their own work, also fueled the fires, leading, by the 1950s, to the creation of various purported editions of the book, handcrafted by Lovecraft enthusiasts. The Vatican Library reportedly still receives inquiries as to a copy supposedly retained within their collections. But where is this all going? I'm primarily providing a little historical context for the use of these techniques in broadcasting, that is, radio broadcasting, and the related world of podcasting, particularly regarding stories presented for Halloween. Some of you may already see where this is going. Well, the most famous example of this, of course, broadcast the day before Halloween on the CBS radio network, is Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the Air's 1938 presentation of War of the Worlds.
What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from that mirror, and it leaps right at the advancing men. It strikes them head on. Oh, Lord, they're turning into flames. Now the whole field's caught up by the woods, the barns, the gas tanks of the automobiles spreading everywhere. Coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
Within the first 3 weeks after the broadcast, there were at least 12,500 articles written about it. And within a week, Hitler had even referenced it in a speech as evidence of the sad state of American democracy. But you've probably heard plenty about this broadcast, so let's move on to a much less discussed Halloween radio stunt from 1952. One broadcast throughout Europe by the American Armed Forces Radio Network from studios outside Frankfurt. The Stars and Stripes, the newspaper of the U.S. military, reported at the time that this incident so alarmed listeners that the network received 1,200 letters of concern over the following 10 days. It involved a midnight visit to Castle Frankenstein. Yes, it's a real place, Burg Frankenstein, built in the 13th century on a hilltop overlooking Darmstadt. You might remember it being mentioned as a possible inspiration for Mary Shelley in our episode, The Frankenstein Method, primarily as it was the birthplace of Johann Conrad Dippel, an eccentric theologian, scientist, and alchemist who claimed to have developed the elixir of life. There are other, even more dramatic legends associated with Dippel, but those may have arisen in the wake of Shelley's novel as a way to connect the two. Sadly, none of these more plausible legends were involved in the hoax. A new one was invented, namely, that every 100 years the creature made by Victor Frankenstein reappeared in the castle, and that this century marker was about to roll around on October 31st, 1952. On that night, 3 announcers were to be dispatched to the abandoned castle for an on-air investigation. A 25-year retrospective broadcast by Armed Forces Radio describes these three investigators assigned to different parts of the castle.
Announcer Carl Nelson's assignment was to enter the Frankenstein family crypt, far beneath the old castle. He was told he'd be the first man to go down there in decades. What he didn't know was that the show's producer had set up a statue in the center of the crypt, and at the height of Nelson's self-induced fear, the producer pulled a string and toppled the statue. The following was aired just as it happened.
Nelson's genuine fear at the stunt was contagious, and one of the participants, Private Keel, described listeners' reactions years later, writing,
People bolted their doors in panic throughout the Rhine Valley. The MPs sent half a dozen patrol cars up to the mountain to investigate with drawn guns. Thousands of frightened letters and phone calls poured into all the AFN stations, many from as far away as England. The London Daily Express called long distance at 1 a.m. to find out what was going on.
Private John Keel, the author of this quote, is a figure who'll be known to our listeners interested in UFOs and Fortean phenomena. He was the author of the 1975 book, The Mothman Prophecies, which described anomalous events and sightings of a winged cryptid around Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Keel also gave us the term Men in Black and became a major figure in the world of ufology. He also had a lifelong interest in stage magic, which might explain his key role in creating the moving statue that startled Nelson. The quoted description of the stunt's impact appeared in Keel's first book, Jadoo, published in 1957, and documenting his alleged adventures among mystics and magicians of the Far East. It's hardly an anthropological text and often reads more like pulp adventure. Keel generally is someone to be read with a healthy dose of skepticism, and the verbiage he employs in describing the rigged statue in Castle Frankenstein, which at best could be seen as the crudest of puppets, if that, reflects his tendency to embellish things. In describing it, he says that
a manufactured monster came striding out of the mist.
It's certainly a bit fluffed up, but when I first heard about this radio hoax, I certainly believed that a statue had been moved, or toppled at least, as described in the retrospective. But now, let's listen to a snippet of the actual 1952 broadcast, as included in that AFN retrospective, and let's see what you think.
Please, God, help. Help! Help, please, help! Please! Can't you hear me out there? No.
At this point, we should explain that Nelson tried to get out of the crypt only to find the door locked. He fainted. With the mic open, the crew rushed to his side. The last thing listeners heard was someone saying, "This thing has gone far enough. Let's get out of here."
Doesn't sound exactly spontaneous to me. Was Nelson genuinely reacting to a rigged statue? Doesn't sound like that to me. It seems that what we have here is a hoax within a hoax, meaning that the story of this manufactured monster scaring an innocent radio crew itself may not be true. Years later, after his passing in 2015, Nelson's widow Jean disputed the version of the Frankenstein stunt presented by Keel and in the AFN retrospective, writing,
I was married to Dick for 58 years, and it was only in the last 10 years that he discovered a recording on the internet of his so-called adventure. They did go to the castle, but could find nothing interesting to report, so Dick ad-libbed the whole thing from beginning to end. Dick always wondered where the announcer of the story got his information.
So the prank itself was a prank, or hoax. It didn't happen. Just worlds within worlds of cunning deceit. And I, for one, believed it. We can all be fooled if we want to believe something. And so, what exactly is the point of all this? I mentioned Halloween hoaxes in the context of radio, but also podcasting. I think some of you may suspect where we're going.
This Halloween at the Moonlight Drive-In in Danville, see The Invisible Ray with Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi, The Uninvited with Ray Milan, and a horrifying midnight spook show. Meet the Mad Doctor who will
As it turns out, urban legends aren't always true. I wanted to let the pleasant aura of mystery linger through the Halloween season, but now that we've moved into November, it's time for a confession. The urban legend related in the show was completely a work of my own imagination, an exercise in creepy storytelling spun out for your entertainment. But it wasn't entirely my own. I was standing on the shoulders of giants, just as the letters, diary entries, and old manuscripts invented by earlier horror writers bolstered their stories. The newspaper articles and forum posts and radio ad and graphics were all created by me with the same intent. The only thing that it came from the real world was the follow-up audio update regarding Mr. Jolly's possible grave in Indiana. That is a real gravestone, strange to tell. And there is an actual off-the-bone barbecue in Danville, Illinois. When I was trying to come up with the address of the non-existent Moonlight Drive-In, I looked at the map of the town, trying to find an appropriate address for a drive-in on the outskirts, and noticed the name, Off the Bone Barbecue. For any listeners now inclined to lose trust in the information I provide, please remember that Bone and Sickle does regularly present fiction, classic horror stories read around Halloween and Christmas, and also please remember that urban legends told around a campfire never begin or end with a declaration that the story is not true. I apologize for any sadness you may feel at this revelation. I also wish it had been such an intriguing spook show and a macabre scene with a dark room, dead body, and a monkey on a microphone. And I do wonder what happened to Mr. Jolly, even if he wasn't real. To be fair, my deception was at least non-specific, and all I provided was a sort of puzzle, a network of urban legends and clusters of mysteries of the sort that make the world more interesting. Such things do exist, after all, even if not in that particular configuration. In closing, I'll offer the disclaimer offered by Orson Welles at the end of the War of the Worlds broadcast. It reflects my own intentions quite closely.
This is Orson Welles, ladies and gentlemen. Out of character, to assure you that the War of the Worlds has no further significance than as the holiday offering it was intended to be. The Mercury Theater's own radio version of dressing up in a sheet and jumping out of a bush and saying boo. Starting now, we couldn't soap all your windows and seal all your garden gates. By tomorrow night, so we did the best next thing. We annihilated the world before your very ears and utterly destroyed the CBS. You will be relieved, I hope, to learn that we didn't mean it, and that both institutions are still open for business. So goodbye, everybody, and remember, please, for the next day or so, the terrible lesson you learned tonight. That grinning, glowing, globular invader of your living room is an inhabitant of the pumpkin patch, and if your doorbell rings and nobody's there, that was no Martian, it's Halloween.